without my gavel, oh, Judy, hand the gavel, please. Thank you. Yep. I'll call this meeting to order and begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please follow after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now we'll call roll. And beginning with myself, Dave Janis, I'm here. Renee Westerlusk is not here. Wes Katzenstein? Here. Lyle Fisher? Here. Judy Decker? Here. Judy answered an affirmative. Camille? Here. Tim Carroll? Here. And Regina Troglin is not here. So we do have a quorum of the voting members for the meeting, and non-voting members. Don Zadiba?
Present.
And Tom Bukowskis?
Here.
John Kersey? John Kersey is not here. Laurel Ioviat? She is not here, and I do not see her online, where she is sometimes. So we do have a quorum. We're good to go with the meeting. So I will now call for public comment, open public comment on subjects not on the agenda. Is there any in the room? Seeing.
I'm Don Decker, member of the PAC. The domestic private well issue just smolders along. And this is a comment from me as a well owner. A good bit of the problem is that the folks that are writing the documents have never actually had anything to do with private wells. So we end up with strange things in our documents. And we don't seem to be able to shake it off, write it out, overcome it. That's my comment for you.
Thank you. Do we have public comment online? Seeing none, we'll move to the next item, approve the minutes of the January PAC meeting. And I'll entertain a motion or discussion.
I move that they be approved.
I second.
You weren't on.
Had a green light, okay. I move that the minutes be approved.
And I second it.
Okay.
And here comes Renee. You got one more.
Any discussion? Okay, we'll vote. I vote aye. Renee Westerlusk? Yes. We'll wait until you get up there. We'll come back to you, Renee. Wes Katzenstein?
Aye.
Lyle Fisher?
Aye.
Judy Decker?
Aye.
Camille Anderson?
Aye.
Tim Carroll? Aye. And Regina's not here. Okay, we'll come back to Renee. You have to wait a couple seconds between presses.
Aye.
Pass that to Renee, please. Okay, so we've got that out of the way. Let's go to the one subject. Next, there's actually two subjects for tonight. The PAC recommendations for board consideration regarding the shallow well mitigation, and we had a long discussion to determine the tasking for this meeting and what subjects, and there's some additional background information that I put in front of each of you, and I expect this is going to be more than a one-meeting evolution to consider this in depth and provide solid recommendations to the board. So they've requested, these again are PAC recommendations for board consideration during their determinations regarding the shallow well mitigation program. And as most of you are aware, because you're at the PAC or at the GA board meetings, we've had two major shallow well mitigation applications that have been made. And during each one of those, they asked for public comments a couple times, and they actually deferred the discussion to another meeting each time, as well as a lot of staff deliberations. And then they came to some considerations that they would like PAC input, since we have designated representatives from many of the, from each stakeholder in the basin here, and they'd like to hear from us from a policy perspective of what they should take into consideration during their deliberations. And the first of those that is particularly up our valley or up our alley, and again, this is from a policy perspective. For some of these, for each of these, there's probably technical considerations also. That's not our bailiwick. It's the policy piece that we're going to be looking at. So we're the first one, acknowledging that wells are expected to last several decades and have several owners during its lifetime. Again, that's the shallow wells. What would the PAC consider to be a fair requirement on the demonstration of well maintenance? And we have at least two designated representatives of shallow well, domestic well owners, which tend to be the shallow well owners in the valley. An example and additional information provided in the text here is an example and documentation of that requirement, when in the past there would have been little, if any, incentive for well owners to maintain such records. So they're trying to be sensitive to the fact that, you know, we would like technically a lot of documentation, but that what's a reasonable expectation for folks to have, and moving forward folks to have? For illustration, consider this: how many homeowners have a file of all the building permits for the homes they now own dating back through the life of not just their ownership, but the home itself, and apply that to a well or the wells that have been existing on their property? So they would like us to take up that question, and that's one, as I mentioned, that we do have two designated members on the panel that can help provide some of that rationale to them, and perhaps it's somewhat along the lines of the considerations that Mr. Decker brought up during the public comment, is that what's reasonable to expect. So it's not the technical aspects of what the GA should consider needed within the program, but what can be expected, knowing that there should be some expectation for a shallow well owner to show credible documentation that they are not overdrafted, or I'm sorry, that they did not mismanage their well or did not maintain it or had other issues.
David, before anyone begins, I have two things. The first thing is, and I think I have asked this of you before, but when you give us a handout, would you please put your name and the date on it?
That's a handout for the PAC.
I understand, but would you please put your name and date on it?
Sure.
Because I keep these papers, and if it doesn't have a name or a date, it's a guesswork.
Okay.
Thank you. The other thing is, I am also a domestic well owner and have been since 1976.
And again, that's part of why they've asked our body to look at this from a policy perspective. Don, you had your hand raised?
Right. I was just going to say, I would suspect that you're going to find that the documentation ranges from, we drilled a well, put a pump in it, and we ran it to failure, to the level that a public agency would do. And it's probably somewhere in between. And I was going to say, I believe we have 3 well owners on the PAC. I would be interested to hear first, before we get into discussion, what they do for the records they keep for their wells, and what they would think is reasonable for a well owner to maintain for their wells.
I have written you a page-and-a-half document about the two items on today's agenda. And since Don asked a direct question, I will answer it. People who are domestic well owners, I think, first of all, I think the shallow well mitigation plan needs to be gone through and by the technical advisory committee, and some definitions be put on the terms that are used, including well maintenance, including domestic well. I have this all in my document here. I'm not going to read it to you, I don't think. But a typical domestic, I'm not talking about a co-op necessarily, but a private domestic well owner, their maintenance occurs when they have an issue. Their pump fails, their motor fails, something like that, and they have to pull the pump and motor out of the well. And there again, I do not think members of the board understand a submersible pump and motor. I don't think they understand how a domestic well is constructed with well casing, with part of the casing having well perforations. That needs to be defined, where the pump and motor, the pump is set, why the pump is set in the well where it is. All those things need to be defined, even if this board happens to know what the definition of those things are. Future board members may not. And we maintain our well when we have, knock on wood, a problem.
Yep.
And I think the most recent one of us who has had a problem is Lyle Fisher. And
I've had a number of them, but that's,
and we have pulled our own well in pump, except the last time Dick Lewis, who, as you know, has passed away, he brought his truck and helped us. We have done it when it was 117 degrees outside, and we have done it when the wind was blowing 35 miles an hour. I invite you to all come and haul up drop pipe when the wind is blowing at 35 miles an hour. It's difficult. When the well pump and motor is pulled, it's examined to see if indeed is that the problem, and usually it is the problem. Either the motor fails or the pump has failed. The last two times we have, and Don can certainly correct me, Don Decker, if I'm incorrect, the last two times we have pulled our well, which is the term used, we've pulled the pump and motor, we have added another at least one 20-foot piece of PVC drop pipe to lower the pump and motor to meet the lowering water supply in the well. Most modern wells are using PVC casing and PVC drop pipe. And why don't you tell them your story?
which one now?
The last one.
What, when, before I deepened it? Yeah, I had a pump failure. Well, no, let's put it this way. Well was originally drilled by Kirschman in September 1978, and I'm currently on my fourth, I can't remember whether it's fourth or fifth submersible pump. This one's been down the bottom of the well, not the bottom, but in the well since, I should have looked that up before I left. And Mr. Zadiba talking about records, yeah, I'm kind of anal about that. I probably have all of them, including the original drilling log from Kirschman, and all of that, and how many times a pump's been changed and when. Yeah, and usually, of course, I had a Sunday morning now. That's when I tried to talk to Steve Johnson, I think I got his attention too, and I said, you know, when a domestic well craps out, you have an emergency. This is a real emergency, particularly on a Sunday morning. You turn on the water, you go to the bathroom, turn on the water, and you'd like have no pressure at all. And I said, I have a problem. My 4,000-gallon holding tank was empty, and I was pumping air only. Circuit breaker was popped on the submersible. Anyhow, long story short, fortunately, Boach was still in business then, and he sent his kid up on Sunday morning. I caught him on his way, because I happened to have his cell phone number is what it was, and I caught him because I knew if I called the office, I'd get a recording, and I wouldn't hear anybody until Monday morning, and this is Sunday. And called his cell, and he was on his way out the door to go to church, and he got his kid, his helper, and sent him up, and we got it limped until anyhow. That was about a $3,000 bill by the time I put in a new Grundfos motor and pump after they pulled it. So that was the problem. The motor had failed. The bottom bearing in the motor, which was not Grundfos, had failed, and the whole thing let the pump section slide anyhow. So changed both. So
Along those lines, I neglected to mention that Don has a complete record book of when the well was drilled, how it was drilled. It also was drilled by Kirschenman with Don's assistance. His assistance involved taking a part off of the well drilling rig and bringing it to his own machine shop and machining it back to working condition for Mr. Kirschenman. He had to argue with him about how deep he wanted the well to be drilled. But we have all the records, including what happened with each incident. And what concerns me about what you have here is wells are as long as they run and are running okay, people don't, whatever you want to call maintain. That's why maintenance needs to be defined. People only do that when they have to pull their pump and motor. Otherwise, it works just fine, and you don't want to pull it up and down all the time. And besides that, it's very expensive.
And so that's the question they're asking us. What is reasonable for us to expect of the average person in the valley, shallow well owner? And to help them with that issue, they want to hear from the expertise on the PAC.
Again, I think, you know, the well mitigation plan was written, we reviewed it, TAC reviewed it, we gave our recommendations and changes to Mr. Johnson. I thought they were adopted, and we all were happy with the plan as we all had written it. But then when the issue came up, the plan was not the same. I think the plan needs to be revised if we need. I am suggesting in my document, which I hope you all read, that perhaps a subcommittee of PAC and TAC get together and revise some of these issues, like technical definitions of words, so that everybody knows what is being talked about. What's a domestic well? What, you know, there's a starter. A domestic well will fail for either mechanical reasons or because the depth to water has dropped below the level of the pump, and the pump can no longer pump water. And that's simply how it is. And there are areas that obviously the Stark Street well was one of those wells that failed because of a drop in water level below their well casing. And you have to take a look at the hydrographs. They are the key to showing what is going on in a given area, whether it's the northwest, the southwest, the west-west, or whatever you want to. I don't know how far the intermediate is supposed to go these days, but the hydrographs will show the story. As far as well failure because of water level dropping.
Okay, so we've got a couple other members that would like to comment. I think you were first, West.
Yeah, I'll just also another reason a well can fail is if the groundwater quality degrades so much that the well is no longer useful. I was just going to throw a couple comments about my well. You know, we all joke about the citizen in the valley that the water comes out of the pipe and that's all they need to know out of their faucet. Well, I'm almost there. Our well was put in by Kirschman in '87. We're in an area that the water has not dropped nearly as much as other places in the valley. We may have high arsenic, but I claim that makes your eyes sparkle and your teeth hard. Just kidding. But so our well, basically we still have the same pump in the hole. So we have never pulled our well. I'm being very careful to keep a pathway cleared for the truck to back in there and pull that well when the time comes. We have had to replace the secondary pump once. That's the pressure pump. And also the pressure tanks have failed once. That's a captive air tank that makes it so that the pressure pump doesn't have to turn off and on as often, basically. So, yeah, I have records of everything I've done. I have the receipts in a folder, and I have the original receipt when the well was put in. I'm feeling a little remiss. I think I should at least be measuring the current that the pump in the hole is drilling, just so I know.
It's a good indication.
So it's been very simple for me. And just to throw another comment in, you know, I think what we're really the real question is, I think, is to remediate wells that fail because the groundwater dropped too much or the groundwater quality got too bad for that person's well to be effective. And I think we need to be very careful. I don't know that there's any kind of well maintenance or lack thereof that can cause those two things to happen. That's not a well maintenance thing. That's overpumping the groundwater. And so now we have found an instance recently dealing with Heritage where well design was the issue. So maybe there's a gray area if the water gets pumped down so low that the pumps in the perf zone and the old cast iron casing fails because of that. That's probably still due to groundwater lowering, even though perhaps that casing was reaching near the end of its lifetime. So I think we need maybe it could be made a little more simple regarding maintenance. Maintenance cannot cause the groundwater to drop too low or the quality to go bad. And we need to be very careful we keep that straight.
I think I used the term maintenance. The idea was, what are reasonable records kept that would indicate from a reasonable person, a reasonable well owner, that they have met some of the factors of their well health. You know, how age, for example, is a big consideration, and soil content, acidity, and all those things. So that's a part of the question. Renee, you had a question or observation also?
Yes, I'm not totally without well experience, okay? I grew up on well water in Illinois. My parents had a household, it still exists to this day, on a shallow individual drinking water well for a household. My experience growing up was the only time there was well maintenance was when something went wrong, okay? I think that these reports that the GA drew up, one is for emergency assistance and the other one is for the shallow well impact. They're too complicated, I think, for the average person because if my family had to fill out one of these, forget it, okay? And the other thing is, I did work on the Heritage Village reports, okay? And the Heritage Village situation is such that they've been through 10 homeowners and managers at least while I've lived there, and not all the managers kept meticulous records from when that well was drilled. They had some maintenance, but basically, there's also some research I did on the state of California. I wrote the DWR. I asked, does the state have any requirements for maintenance of wells? And if so, what are they? And they referred me to some websites, but they said in their statement, DWR, the state of California does not have requirements for maintenance of wells. So anyway, they have these websites you can go to, and they have like annual inspection, they have suggestions, annual inspection, they have homeowners maintenance checklist. They're all suggestions, but they're not requirements. And I think, like when you look at the Stark well that went bad and the Heritage well, to expect any well owner to keep meticulous records is ridiculous. And these forms need to be simplified and made easier to fill out. Because I think the average person, some of the stuff had to be filled out by the well driller.
But
And it's
yes,
not an
that's
easy
right.
thing. And my family couldn't fill these out if they had to qualify for shallow well. You know, and I know my family may have some records of
And
things that are
we're getting
replaced.
into the exact discussion that Judy's proposal is probably a good one, that we have a subcommittee look at this in depth as to what, and you brought it up, what is reasonable.
Well,
So, and that's what we're being asked for. And by the way, the emergency policy is not part of this. This is the shallow well policy. And my earlier first comments about us having at least 2 designated members that represent folks with shallow wells on the committee was not to imply that anybody else should not be involved in this subcommittee. They want the opinion of the committee as a whole, informed by those that are most knowledgeable of it.
Renee, do you know perhaps how much it cost just to pull your pump and motor at Heritage Village? Just pull it, not do anything else?
I was never given the breakdown costs. All I know is that they spent thousands of dollars replacing the pump, getting it pulled, all that stuff. And then the other thing that was brought up at the GA meeting, which I thought was unfair, is that they're expecting, this well should have been scrubbed and cambered. Well, cammering and scrubbing costs a lot of money, and scrubbing was estimated between $20,000 and $30,000 to do for the Heritage well. And that's a shallow well. I'm telling you, if my family had to come up with $20,000 or $30,000 to scrub their well, forget it.
Right. Well, I brought it up because you mentioned DWR. You got something off the web from DWR about an annual inspection. No one can afford to do that. And the other thing that needs to be pointed out that is not in my document, which I hope everyone reads, is that there are very few professional well drillers now. Boach is no longer here. He moved to Texas or so, I believe. Garrison is the only local well driller. I don't know if anyone is up in the Kern Valley or Antelope Valley, but they are in constant demand. So coming up with some sort of scheme where private domestic well owners or even co-ops would have to do an annual inspection is impossible. It's also impractical, and it's also expensive. But again, I point out, shallow well mitigation plan was created for those who have a loss of water in groundwater storage. It doesn't have anything to do with well failure because of a mechanical reason. It doesn't have anything to do with well failure because of water quality, because if your water quality deteriorates to the point where you can no longer use it as potable water, deepening your well isn't going to solve your problem. What is needed is a hookup with someone who has potable water. And while Wes brought that up, it is going to be an increasingly important consideration in the future. As the water in our valley continues to decline, there are areas of the valley like the southeast and the south where water quality has deteriorated to the point of no return. And a beautiful, ugly example of this is a cemetery.
I got, and for the record, I too grew up on a farm with a domestic well, 2 of them as a matter of fact. So yeah, I fully understand. And talk about maintenance, a couple things I thought of too that I do just sort of by, I listen to my submersible pump. I still have a steel galvanized tank, and you put your ear up against it when it's running, and I can hear it running. And funny thing, you know, I have noted one time when I did it, and I pardon my sound effects, but it was going, and I said, I got a problem here, friends. And yeah, I did, yeah. But I listened to it. I listened to the check valves clattering, it means I'm pumping water. I also keep track of and talk about pressure tanks. I think I'm on number 5, I think is where my pressure tank deal goes, on how long it's on and how long it's off when I got water running. Time it so I know what it is. I should every year, which I don't. If those times start changing too much, then I will shut off the system, drain the pressure off, and check the pressure in the pressure tank, and add air as required. So, but that's what I do. You know, required? No, but that's what I do. So,
Don,
Other comments?
Don we put in a railroad tank car that is our storage, water storage. It holds, 8,000 gallons. We irrigate with it on a gravity feed system, and we have a pressure tank for the house. And many people do not have a storage tank. They have a pressure tank, which both West and Lyle have mentioned, and they do not have storage. One thing a storage tank does is it allows the pump to run less often. And it
because
also
that
gives you a
submersible
backup.
pump, that submersible pump's an expensive item. One on top's no big, well, it's not cheap, but it's nothing like that Grundfos motor and pump down the well. Absolutely not. I had another one too. Yeah, Judy mentioned it in passing. As a homeowner and domestic well owner, there are some key stuff I feel that everyone should know, and some of it might be hard to find, but you need to know depth to water in your well. Kern Water Agency will tell you that. You need to know where your pump's set, how much water it's in, and it'd be nice to know how deep your hole is. when it was, well, of course, I knew when it was drilled, but you buy a house and it's got a well on it, it'd be good to know those things when you take over, and then track it.
I think if you were to write a maintenance book or instructions for a well owner, it's going to probably mostly be run it till it breaks. Now, Lyle, you found a few things you can do that might be giving you some warning that it's getting ready to break. Yeah. Also, just for the record, I also have a storage tank. I have both the storage tank and pressure tanks for the reasons that Lyle outlined. Now, Bosch was well known for being a good well driller, and I started getting nervous about 6 or 7 years ago that my pump in the hole hasn't failed yet. And so I called him up. I said, "What do you recommend? Should I go ahead and replace this thing?" He thought for a while. He says, "Run it till it fails. So you maintain it when it fails." That was basically his guidance.
Camille, you had some thoughts?
My only comment was similar to Lyle's. Once a house is sold, no matter how great the records were of the original owner, you may not actually get those records. Or they may be in an odd format that, they go into a box and the person who buys the house has no idea about the details for the well. So that would be another issue as far as proving maintenance or how many pumps had been replaced, if any.
That's exactly some of the things they want us to advise them on.
Again, that is where the hydrographs come into play. The hydrographs, for instance, on the Stark well, clearly showed a large decline in water in storage in that area, while the hydrograph for the Heritage well did not show much of a decline at all. I was, in fact, quite surprised at the lack of decline.
Tom, did you have input?
So I don't own a well, but I do have, I guess, some kind of general questions or concerns about when it comes to maintenance. We've heard about the mechanical parts of the well, and those are replaceable. And while they're not cheap, they're a lot cheaper than drilling and doing well.
Right.
But the casing and I guess the condition of the parts that aren't easily replaced without drilling it. If you have an old well with a steel casing, is there maintenance that can be performed that will greatly extend the life of the well, beyond the mechanical parts that you have to replace, that would make a difference in that if we knew that it had been, say, scrubbed or, cleaned in some way, that it would have made a difference in, extending the life of the well? Because we all expect to change our oil in our car, and that makes a difference.
It's not the same as maintaining a car. One of the things that can be done with a steel casing is to sleeve it with PVC, if possible. But there again, if the water level has dropped below the level of the end of the casing that's there, you aren't going to be able to do that without deepening the well. In some instances, with some well drillers, and Don Decker can speak to you on this with much more authority than myself and more knowledge. In some cases, you can go down through the existing casing and deepen the well. Did they do that on your well?
Yes, I was going to jump in on you there. I had the problem, of course, about 2013. And just to echo what Judy said, Kirschman wouldn't even talk to you about deepening a well. He said, "I don't deepen wells, I only drill new ones, period." Boach would, and he deepened ours. 6-inch steel casing. And what I discovered, what happened, a 3-year-old submersible pump, I plugged it up with rust in 3 years. And when they pulled it, and I go, "That's not right. There's something wrong with my casing." So I got my original drilling log out, and sure enough, the pump was about 6 feet below where the perf started, which means the steel casing was rusting like a big time and plugged up the pump. So I knew then I was borrowed time, and we had to deepen, and Boach deepened it, put a drill bit down the steel casing, and then went down another 100 feet, and then cased the whole thing all the way to the bottom with PVC. So, and I should be good for at least the rest of my life anyhow. So. But yeah, there's deepening a well there's been at least 2, maybe 3 instances in my neighborhood where deepening didn't work. If the casing is too bad and they cave in and do whatever, they can't. They got to drill a new well then. We were lucky that we were able to deepen and it worked. So it doesn't always work, like I said. So save a whole bunch of money. It's only $13,000 to deepen, and it'd be about $25,000 to drill a new one.
Tom, you were
So Don had asked the original question, which was, so what is reasonable for a well owner to maintain as far as records go on their maintenance? And really what I'm hearing here is that we run it until it doesn't work. We figure out why it didn't work, since it's not like pulling a dipstick out of an engine to check it. I mean, you got to have somebody professional come and pull the thing up, and I know that much. So do you guys want to summarize what you think is reasonable maintenance records to keep?
I thought about that before coming here, and I'll tell you, I don't think so.
Okay.
You run it till it fails, that's correct, You don't want to.
Maintenance is just an example of the things they wanted us to consider. What are those things that a reasonable homeowner in the valley, especially now that we have an agency charged with bringing the valley into sustainability, and the water level we know it's going to drop in certain areas for sure, up until the point that we're able to stabilize it per Sigma law. So and given to us was maintenance as the example, and there are several other things that have been discussed in here, and with regards to what kind of record keeping might be reasonable to expect, and looking at it. So both in the past and moving forward, if I was a private well owner or a homeowner association well owner, what should I expect if I want to get recompense for my effect of that lowering groundwater base in my well? What should I be able to expect to present to the groundwater authority? Or what do I need to have in my records, moving forward?
I don't think the records are the issue. I think the plan is the issue, as I have said repeatedly tonight and in here, and some definitive definitions need to be made.
We can make that recommendation.
I just
I
had a
don't
thought,
mean
too.
to in any way denigrate the Heritage Village Association well issue, but that was not a domestic well. And with one look at the hydrograph, one could see that it was, yes, the well definitely had a problem, but the problem was not due to the lowering of groundwater. The GA has been lucky and gotten millions of dollars in grants, but they're also spending millions of dollars of water district customers' money, and they cannot afford to have an open-ended shallow well mitigation plan, because there are so many very expensive projects they have on their plate. And so a relook at the shallow well mitigation plan with some clear definitions of what's involved, the issues and what's involved, would be not only helpful to the person applying, and it should be written in simple language, not legal language, so that a well owner can understand it easily.
I just had, just for a second, I just had a thought, just popped in my mind too. Talking about maintenance and all that stuff, it's almost irrelevant.
Yes.
The only clue here is the lowering of the groundwater and water quality. Wes mentioned it. That's it. How well you maintained your well or what you did with it is irrelevant. It don't matter. If the water table's going down, and oh, by the way, the water table in my well is about 60 feet below where it was when it was drilled.
And you talked about the example of your casing going bad.
Yeah.
And that is
But
one
I
of those other considerations is what's reasonable to expect you to have done then, perhaps. And there are
It
conditions.
depends on your water, depends on
If
the water
we're going
quality,
to,
how long
if
it
we're going to
lasts.
spend groundwater authority money that comes from all the agencies, the majority of which right now is funded by the water district customers, of which I am one, for example, we want to be sure that, to be fair, that we're saying, what are the expectations for you to apply? And that's what we're being asked. And Tom, I know you have another comment.
Well, I just wanted to kind of recap what I heard is from you guys is that really maintenance isn't necessarily an issue so much as being able to, perhaps as a homeowner, being able to know when the groundwater is lowering and when the quality is going down. And I don't know that most people would actually know how to tell. I mean, obviously you have a distinct.
Kern Water Agency to measure it.
Yes.
I'm
It
sorry. who?
doesn't cost
Get
anything.
Kern Water Agency to measure depth of water. Mine was just measured again.
Okay.
Measured twice a year, except during COVID, and then it was all yada, yada.
And
yada.
so perhaps, Judy, you're advocating for redoing the definition of who a domestic well owner
I
is.
am advocating for providing definitions for a whole lot of things. You neglected to, I guess it was David, to note that Lyle said that his well had to be deepened, and that's why the casing was starting to fail at the bottom of his well. It wasn't because the casing was simply rotting, it was because he
It's
was
exposed.
pumping sand.
I wasn't pumping sand, I was pumping rust from the rusting casing. The
that's-
perforations, the water table was below where the perforation started.
That's the issue.
So that was,
Is that the people who are making the decisions, or who in the future might be making the decisions, don't know the definitions of what is being talked about. So my suggestion is, I mean, didn't we spend months rehashing the communication and engagement plan? There are items that should be defined simply and clearly so that people know what they are. A domestic well is one of them. I mean, if you don't clearly define a domestic well, maybe one of the large agricultural enterprises would like to have the GA come take care of their well. You can't have something that has a bunch of requirements called maintenance. The very first sentence, and I don't know, David, if you wrote this, forgive me, but it says fair. What's fair mean?
yeah.
From what I'm hearing from you well owners talk about is that if you could document either through this Kern Water Agency report that you're in an area where the water level has been going down, maybe that would be a good factor in determining whether or not you'd be eligible for these shallow well mitigation funds, as opposed to, anybody anywhere being able to prove that they maintained their well.
That's the
because
key.
it's difficult.
That's the key. If your well quits because you or whoever you hired didn't install the pump and the motor in the proper place, or put in a pump and motor that's way too big for your well, you're going to have well failure. but that's not a GA problem. That's your problem.
That's what they're trying to find from
Right.
us a
That's-
recommendation about.
But
What
that
are
has
those?
That has nothing to do with maintenance. That has to do with creating a set of definitions.
Maintenance was only the example.
Okay.
They're looking for our considerations, as I said before, of what are those things that are reasonable, and that's what gets to the fair. What's fair, having, in the past, before there was a Sigma, what was fair for records and maintenance and ways you just structure kinds of things to prove that the rest of the payers, represented by the payers into the groundwater authority for the valley, are expected to pay for your well to be mitigated. And that's what they want to hear from
Okay.
us,
I will-
regardless of what the policy says now. And we are free to make a recommendation to go back and update that, but we are being asked, what are those fair considerations to expect from well owners for documentation covering the past and the future?
I will remind you that the goal of Gene Moran, the hydrologist for Stetson anyway, is to have the valley set up in, I probably am going to mispronounce this, Thiessen polygons that are equal, where wells, every area has a certain number of wells that are solely monitoring wells, so that they can look at that and say, okay, the area where Lyle is not that far from where the Stark well system is, actually.
Half a
There
mile.
have been quite a few wells in that area that have had to be re-drilled because of the lowering of groundwater. Not to point fingers, but the water district has 3 production wells near there, 2 to the west, 1 to the northeast, combined with got the wrong company, Searles Valley Minerals well in section 35, and some agriculture. So it's not unexpected. I say this not as a blame. I'm saying this to point out an example and to emphasize yet again the importance of those hydrographs.
And we're free to say that.
That's good.
Back to them. That's part of what we're being asked. Tim, you haven't spoken yet. Don, did you have any? You haven't spoken since the beginning. So what I'm hearing is, and I'm trying to get to some level of closure here in our tasking, is I still believe there's a relevant task for us, that we can answer some of these questions and also make the recommendations for clarification of definitions and perhaps a modification to certain parts of the policy. But we're being asked, I think there is from what everybody's talked about, there is value in us providing what is fair with regards to this from policy perspective to expect from folks. Shallow well owners or in groups or individuals, that what kind of documentation might they be expected to provide? And obviously, they're not going to have the hydrographs. That's something the groundwater authority has to bring forward. And that's a part of it. And that's something we can say, but that's not the expectations. Renee?
Yeah,
you had your hand up
I
first.
think that the maintenance records that should be accepted are any repairs that have been done on the wells. To expect them to do other things like, was your well ever scrubbed, disinfecting it, all that stuff. I guess that they would have records if they had to have that done, but expecting them to have that done and having the well cameraed on a regular basis and things like that is ridiculous. I think the groundwater authority should accept any records they have of anything that was ever replaced or redone or fixed and leave it at that. Unless they want to, like I said, adopt, homeowner's maintenance checklist. It doesn't look like it's going to cost hardly any money. You know, it's mainly stuff that the well owner should do around their area, like they have to keep hazardous chemicals away from your well, periodically check the well cover, you know, maintain proper separation between your well and buildings. If the well owner is like Lyle or West, where they're constantly checking on their well, then they could document that, you know, as well maintenance. But to me, to require all these other procedures that are modern day, because I did a little research on the internet, they didn't start cameraing wells until sometime in the 1970s in California. And now all of a sudden, you know, it's like a state-of-the-art standard, but a lot of these wells were put in before the 70s or in the 70s, 80s. It wasn't a standard in the industry to camera everything. It's only for like water agencies that can afford to do that. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is these standards that are put out now for well maintenance are not what was required 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
And that's
or
exactly what they're asking for from us. And I think I have a path forward. Don, did you want to say something first?
Yeah, I was just going to say, after listening to, you know, those that have their own private wells, and I certainly understand the cost. I certainly understand the cost that's associated with some of these preventative maintenance procedures that, you know, they're not in the position to pay like a public agency. Perhaps something that could be done is to identify what sorts of information well owners could be collecting, because it seems like the burden of proof falls on the well owner when they're applying for the funding, and I think it's not realistic to expect, you know, the high level of documentation perhaps that you want to see. But if in the policy it lists what sorts of documents or what sorts of preventative maintenance procedures are typical, maybe that gives them some guidelines of things they could be doing or should consider doing. Again, the more information that somebody brings to the Groundwater Authority when they're trying to make the case, the better. But again, as Judy and others have pointed out, the hydrographs are key. If there's information in that area on well levels and what the trends have been, that's a key part of the information. But again, obviously, the more information somebody can provide on the history of the well, the better case they can make for getting reimbursement.
I think you've outlined the issue pretty well, but I think where we need to go, and that Judy suggested a version of this, is we need a subcommittee of the best folks up here to move forward on this separate task A moving forward.
I volunteer.
We'll get there.
But I have a question of Don.
Well, we haven't gotten to public comment here. I
No,
was going to say.
I'm not asking a question of that, Don. I'm asking a question of that, Don.
Yeah.
Don
as long-
Zadiba.
What I'm trying to do is get us to agree to a committee moving forward, then open it for public comment.
But can I ask Don Zadiba a
Yes,
question?
yes.
All right. Don Zadiba. The water district wells, when do you pull them? When do you pull the pump and motors out of them? Do you do it on a regular basis?
Yes, about every 3 years we're doing well rehabs.
Well, every 3 years, okay. But it's.
And that
very
involves pulling the pump, doing inspection. Again, I know that's expensive and I wouldn't expect that level of
Okay,
maintenance for private well owners, but we're a public agency, we have to provide water. It's important that we make sure what the condition of the well is. So we'll pull the pump, camera it, to generally scrub it, bail it, and in some cases, go ahead and put a new pump and motor in, because you don't want to take a chance of that pump and motor failing after you spend all that money to do
Right.
the rehab.
Once you got it out, you might as well change it.
did you hear
And
that?
it's 3 to 5 years.
Did you understand that? He said.
I didn't hear the comment back.
He said.
Once you got the pump out, you might as well change it.
Right.
And it's
Especially
a
if you
3 to
have a question
5 year
you might-
intervals. I'm not going to say we do it every 3 years, but generally 3 to 5 years are scheduled.
Thank you.
And of course, we monitor the levels, we monitor the flows. If the flow starts dropping off, then we obviously have a problem with the pump.
I
Okay,
haven't-
let's open this for public comment.
May I say something else before you do that?
Yes.
I believe the comment Camille made is very important. The one that when a house is sold, the new owner may not receive information. And I think that's something that perhaps should be put in the engagement plan to urge realtors to make sure that that information, if there is a well on that property, that information be passed along.
And I think that's
And I think it should be in writing in our engagement plan, and it is not.
I think that's exactly the purpose of what we might do and what was expected to us to do, because they've recognized and we have recognized the situation has changed before California decided to manage groundwater. And therefore expectations have changed. And it's very appropriate in the discussions. I think there are several opportunities. This isn't just the only one to say, hey, moving forward, here are things that well owners should take into consideration if they want to have the potential to take advantage of this mitigation of their well that might have been caused by the lowering groundwater. So we open public comment. Don?
Don Decker again. There's another area that was brought up loud and clear by it was Steve Johnson in particular, who basically over and over again was talking about average well life. Well, we might get 40 years. The life of a steel-cased well depends substantially on the water quality being pumped. The North Brown Road folks with typically poorer water have shorter casing life. You can't just pick a number and apply it to, for example, the Stark Street folks that have really high quality water. That well would have lasted way beyond where it is now if it had been deeper. So there needs to be some thought put into, actually there is a fair amount in the literature. This is not something you have to invent by yourself. The age of the well, at the point the water drops below the point the pump can't reach it anymore, how much life is left in the well? That question needs to be answered over and over again. So I'm bringing this up to you because it's another item in this item A. Anybody have any questions on what I just said?
No, I agree with you.
Yeah, it's a very important aspect. It determines how the money ultimately gets allocated to the project, what fraction of the cost of a new well is going to be remitted to the failed well owner.
Don, do you think when they do the
Microphone, please, Tim.
when they pull the well or do the investigation, a lot of the information about how well it's been maintained or what caused the failure should be available then. You wouldn't necessarily have have somebody do all the tracking, but you could find out a lot when the failure occurs in investigation.
Well, that's why one does a camera scan. And it isn't necessarily that expensive either. Totally high resolution, high lighting intensity and all that's typically done with a commercial well is one thing, but a private well is another. Certainly the hydrograph, the depth to water is a critical item. The examination, if you did do a video of the perf zone to discover what kind of condition it was in, is the sort of thing that one could imagine doing, but it isn't oftentimes done. There was actually a fellow here in the valley doing, odd video tasking, and Wells was one of them. I don't think he's here anymore. He actually had a phone book, ad. The main thing here is that the well failure is, in general, is not due to some kind of failure to maintain. We're talking about a very specific kind of well failure. It's well failure as a result of declining water levels. And all of this business, well, you didn't maintain your well, that's why it failed. That may or may not be the case. And in general, it's not. The Stark Street well was pretty clearly, it failed because of drying out.
I have a question. Are you saying that we have to put thought on water quality as a measure of whether a well should be considered for well mitigation plan? That should be one of the measurements?
Yes.
And so how would you suggest we approach the shallow well owner? Should we ask them if they had any water quality tests done?
Sure.
Should that be on
absolutely.
the list?
And most private wells are, with some regularity, maybe it's every 5 years or 7 or whatever, are sending samples off for a general mineral. But you can also make a TDS measurement with basically a pocket-sized instrument that's calibratable and will give you a 3-digit result. Cost you $50. So you don't necessarily have to have any expensive process to get a handle on the issue that we're talking about. It's the chloride ion that really does the dirty work, the corrosion. The other thing that's missing from the GA discussion, and has been since they rewrote what we all, as PAC or TAC, put together in the early days, the whole issue of casing integrity hinges on the intake of the pump being above the perf zone. Most people, well drillers, it's as if the perf zone isn't even there once it's installed. You can put the pump wherever you want, and that is complete nonsense, especially higher horsepower. Once the pump goes into the perf zone, you're on the tail end of life. That needs to be part of the discovery made when a well is examined for failure. And it's something that everybody that owns a well needs to be paying attention to as they lower their well lower and lower as the years go by. You reach a point of danger, unusual danger, when you drop into the perf zone.
And something like that may be a candidate for the communications engagement. Don, we've got one more public commenter.
Yeah.
And Ron, it's been a while, so can you identify yourself officially?
Ron Kosinski. and ladies and gentlemen, if I'm allowed to say that. Good to see you again. There's some good points made here. Judy, you made a very good one that I think that number one is there needs to be a lot of definition so the well owners know what they really need to put together. I agree with Lyle and West on, and the normal person's gonna wait till it fails. Now, I fall in the category of these two guys. I'm pretty anal too. I keep records on everything. So here's, and I agree with Camille as well, that when a home is sold, whoever buys my home is gonna be very lucky. They're gonna get all these records and everything I've done, every replacement, everything, but that typically doesn't happen. But I think I'm gonna try to read the mind of the GA here. Number one is what happened with the water level. That's probably the main thing they're looking for, because if the water level drops, and that's the mitigation requirement, that's where the hydrographs will come in handy and things like that. But I think what the other part of it is when it comes to maintenance is what is the dollar amount that's going to be awarded for the mitigation? That depends on a lot of things. And I think you need to keep that in mind. So I think it behooves a well owner to have as much information and data as they can put together, because the more they have, the better chance of a higher dollar amount. If you don't have it, then you're at risk of you have a 40-year-old well. And, I would have had to do work to it because I'm losing the pump, I'm losing the casing, whatever it may be. And it may have failed, it may have finally failed because of the water level. But how much is the GA responsible for in reimbursement? And that's where I think when they talk about maintenance records and what do you have to prove what this well is worth. Because I think that's the important part of once they find out that the water level's dropped, then obviously you fall in the shallow mitigation. It's the amount of money. How do they determine that? And I think I'm not sure what your recommendation will be on that, but the more the homeowner can produce to show the well has been taken care of or not taken care of, or maybe it was due to be deepened anyway, or maybe it doesn't have the availability to be deepened. So is the GA going to have to drill a new well, or try to, like Lyle, you said you got lucky, you're able to deepen it. What if you weren't? And when it comes to water quality, that's a whole different story. Because what is the remedy? The remedy isn't to drill a deeper well or to drill another well. What is the remedy for that one? So is there a compensation for the fact that the quality went down? And how is that determined? So those are things you need to keep in mind. I think you're on the right track, and I think expecting well owners to have detailed information, I think you might find, what do you think, Lyle? One out of 10 maybe that has detailed information?
Probably weird people like me might have a lot.
Well, there's a lot of them out there.
Yeah. But a lot of them won't. And if you buy a house, you probably won't have anything.
Yeah, and I agree with you. You need to get the word out there to the realtors that new buyers need to request that information and everything that's available. But again, the dollar amount that you're going to be awarded, I think, is going to be very dependent on what is the value of that well. And you're going to have to somehow come up with an idea of how you expect the GA to get that information from everybody. Thank you.
Both great points.
Yep, thank you.
I have a couple comments. Lyle, on your well, someone might claim yours failed because the pump got stuck down in the perf zone. But then the question would be, was that part of a normal lowering to try to extend the life of the well? Was that?
I'll tell you what I realized was that they're all gone now, so I guess I can say this publicly. Kirschman screwed up. I did not have 40 feet of perf zones in the bottom of my well. I had 60. I didn't think I was there yet. Why he put in 3 sections of perforated pipe, I don't know. But there should not have been. There should have been only 2. So that's, yeah. But I ain't worried about it because I'm not going to build a GA for it, so too old now.
So. It occurs to me that your well might have been one that could have been remediated if that were in place. Your well failed in part because the water level dropped too low.
Oh, absolutely.
And the point's being made that, okay, maybe since the pump was down in the perf zone, maybe the casing didn't have much lifetime left anyway, so maybe you should moderate how much you get paid, remediated.
Sure.
So it's probably a combination of things. But one from a well records point of view, I think it would be of great interest that your pump was in the perf zone.
Yeah.
And that probably contributed to the problem. But if the groundwater hadn't lowered, maybe
I
you
would
wouldn't
be,
have
yeah.
lost your well.
If the level to the water had not gone down, the depth of the water had not gone down, I wouldn't have had a problem. So now what? Yeah.
I think.
But we still, I just wrote them down for my own self here too. We only have two factors for remediation for, getting paid back domestic well owners. And that's lowering the groundwater levels and water quality. That's it. Everything
consolidation is the third
everything
one.
else is kind of moot.
Consolidation is the third one, depending on location.
That's
Well,
a different
that's-
issue.
that's
And I
different,
think some of the things that have been recently talked about, brought up by Wes even, they're subjective. And just like the first sentence about fair maintenance records, that is a subjective sentence. The GA and the public and the well owners will all be better off if we can make some factual definitions that will clarify the requirements. Factual, not subjective. Obviously, if the water level hadn't gone down, Lyle wouldn't have had, and along with a whole lot of other people, wouldn't have had to deepen their well. He was lucky they were able to sleeve his casing with a PVC casing. That saved him $100,000. Well drilling, whether it's a new well or a replacement well, is extremely expensive. You all know, well, if you read the article in the paper yesterday about the new Richmond school, the article stated that since 2021, construction costs have gone up 34%. That has happened across the board, as near as I can tell, with everything from the food you buy at the grocery store to everything to your electric bill.
We have one last public
Yeah,
comment.
I'll be brief. I wanted to bring up an example, and Judy brought this to mind. If you have an insurance company and you have wind damage on your roof that in turn rain gets in, and I've experienced this before, not personally, but when I used to do remediation, insurance company comes out and they look at this roof and they say, you haven't maintained this roof. It's obviously, everything's worn off of it, and you haven't maintained it, so either we're going to deny your claim or we're going to cut it way back. The only way I think that the GA can satisfy what a well is worth is they might have to bite off some money to say, okay, we've determined the water levels have dropped, so yes, mitigation dollars are available. However, we're going to have to foot the bill to go in there to pull it and take a look at and make a determination of what the well's worth. It may be a physical thing they have to do because you can't necessarily tell by the records what it's worth.
That's very expensive.
Well, it may be, but how are they going to come to a cost of am I going to give you, $40,000 for a new well, or am I going to give you $20,000 to repair this one, or am I going to give you $15,000 or $30,000 to deepen? I mean, that can't be determined, maybe by just looking at the records. It may be they're going to have to say, okay, you fall in line for mitigation, and we're going to have to poll this and determine what that amount is. And if we determine it, maybe the cost of determining it, some percentage of it comes out of what's awarded. I don't know. Thank you.
Thanks. Do we have any online comments? Okay, with that, we have one volunteer for our subcommittee. Judy.
I think it should be joint between PAC and TAC, because PAC members are policymakers. They are not technical people to technically define things like perf zones and whatever else you might want to
We can make that recommendation. I can't as the PAC chair, or I can't make that decision as the PAC chair. And I know there had been talk about some consideration that the TAC address the technical portion of this and the PAC address the policy. So I would suggest we form our committee, take the recommendation that some consideration being given to it being a joint committee, and move that forward. So what we need is I'd say we need at least 3 members from this committee
Yeah,
to
okay.
round it out, and I think we've heard a lot
You
of
got
really
'em.
good considerations
You
of that
got 'em.
tonight. So
You
were you
volunteer?
were you volunteering, Lyle?
Yeah.
Okay, so
West is too.
Thank you. I am.
Dave, one issue that we haven't discussed that we may want to revisit when we're looking at the shallow well mitigation program is when it was first being drafted, there was brought up the requirement that the well be registered with the Groundwater Authority. There was a lot of discussion about that and a lot of support that that be a requirement because at the time, people were just not registering their wells. Something we want to revisit. I think if the GA is going to invest in reimbursing somebody for damages to their well, the well should be registered with the Groundwater Authority. Something that we probably should be brought up as a point of discussion when we're revisiting this.
I agree, and that is definitely a policy issue. And so, Renee?
I just have a comment on the, using the groundwater quality as a parameter for judging whether there should be an award by the GA for a registered well. I think that's important, that there needs to be some kind of parameter assessing the water quality. I think that's essential.
Yeah, and that was a good comment from the floor also.
From Don, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to try to summarize what I think the tasking of the committee was that I heard. I see it broken down into at least 3 areas for A here. One is the fair, and it is somewhat subjective, but what is our recommendation for the reasonable, fair expectation for a well owner of some level of documentation of several areas with respect to what they present in their request for mitigation. And there are 2 segments of that consideration at least, pre-sigma and post-sigma, and that would help a lot with that. As part of that recommendation, I think we would have I think we've all generally agreed with the comment, very much so, that definitions need to be provided for those words, for anything that we require, and those things that are the factors that a homeowner could be, or a well owner could be expected, or well owners could be expected to understand. If we want them to understand them, certainly the definitions must be as clear as possible. The second area is, if I can read my recommendations, recommendations for communication engagement, and perhaps, I would go so far. We have the JPA, the Groundwater Authority, was formed of a JPA, in fact, because there were members of that JPA that had authorities that the groundwater doesn't have. And some of those authorities may have the authority to not only make a recommendation, but change a requirement in the future in some area, let's say well documentation as it moves forward, or well drilling permits, et cetera. Just think about that. Take it, and so within the considerations is, and we'd have to get clarification, we're not a policy decision board, we're a policy recommendation board, and it may be so if you have the authority to do that, should the some level of documentation be required in the disclosures to homeowners of the existing and past situation with the well, perhaps? That's one that occurred to me right away, is the county, or I don't think we may have city residents with wells, but is there some requirement that some level of documentation be passed to the new owner and maintained moving forward with regards to wells? Those kinds of things would be in this second category in general that the committee would consider. The third ones are the recommendations that we would specifically make about adjustments to the policy as written. And again, we're talking about the shallow well policy, mitigation policy, not the emergency policy. Does that resonate with most?
Right, I do have a comment. A few years ago, one of the people who attended our domestic Well Owners Association meetings, had a friend who was a realtor here, and she asked this person about the issue of realtors informing prospective home buyers of well conditions on properties that had wells, and if they did so. And the answer from this person was no. And it seemed to me that, well, we've never sold a home, but I believe if you sell your home, you have to have your roof inspected, and if it doesn't pass, you have to give the buyer a discount or repair the roof or something, and the same might be true for termites or something like that. It ought to be a law that a prospective homebuyer is given knowledge of their water supply.
And we can recommend something to that direction, perhaps. We're expanding a little bit with the task we've been given here, but I think it's appropriate. We've unearthed some things that may very much prove valuable, especially with respect of pre-SGMA and post-SGMA. And the fact that the JPA members have the authorities to perhaps consider some of these level of changes to the policy or to their legal requirements for things like sale of property that includes a well. So far we have Judy, West, and Lyle. Any other volunteers for the committee? Okay, and we'll also move forward with a question if we can have that a joint ad with the TAC. And I'll move forward with that as part of the PAC report out of this meeting. And I would suggest I'll leave it to the determination of the committee members who they want to be their leader and their chair and do the report outs as well as kind of coordinate the meetings. So is that, do you have a general consensus that's what we want to do? It doesn't need a vote. Any disagreements? Okay, let's move to number 2 and try to be a little bit quicker and get into closure on this and explain what we're trying to get at here. And that's mostly what this extra background provided by the staff was to us. And it's acknowledging, this one is about acknowledging that private domestic wells are by their nature shallower than deeper municipal wells. How should the GA board handle this issue in light of the potential for state consolidation grant money? And this comes to light, especially because some of the consolidation efforts and the amount of state grant money that is available to do this. And so related to it is the state policy which seeks to consolidate these types of wells into larger systems as evidenced, and I left the D off that, as evidenced by the Dune 3 and hometown consolidations that are presently being processed. And if you read the final paragraph of this backup additional information, these types of consolidations are not uncommon, and the grants, they are generous enough that all fees and costs can be covered. In fact, it is not uncommon for the consolidation grants to also include the costs to cover capacity charges, which in turn could be used to help fund the water district's needed import water purchases. And separately, and might be more important, is moreover, any water allotted free of replenishment charge to a consolidated system would revert to the water district. So if let's say Lyle's well had failed and the groundwater authority looked at this and offered as a part of the mitigation, if it were proven that it was due to the chronic lowering of water, and it was most feasible, and you and the water district went and got a grant for that, the water district would service you, but they would get credit for your allocated water under the groundwater GSP. And so that would, add additional value to it. And so in that light, they're asking us, should we consider this issue in certain areas in close proximity or heavy, exactly like the Stark situation is, where the water district surrounds that? Is that something that should be looked at seriously? Or would we recommend careful consideration, given that the grants are possible to do this, given to that as a mitigation subject? And I think in the interest of time, one of the things we want to do, now that we have the additional background information, and I'd hope to have one of our legal counsels on, I would ask instead, Carol, do you have any comments on this that you'd like to add?
On the consolidation aspects?
Yes.
This was something I think that just came about and I think I think Phil Hall is the one who suggested that maybe the PAC might want to consider this. I thought he might be on the call this evening, but I don't think I see him.
Yeah, I knew he was going to try, Carol, but he was triple booked and he had the planning commission tonight too.
So, but it's really a matter of, does it make more sense in light of the expense of trying to drill new wells or go deeper, or replace equipment, to ensure that private wells are able to continue, or that, residential wells can be continued? Does it make more sense to use grant money or available money to look at consolidations? Does that make more sense, rather than spend, GA money to work on mitigation from declining water levels? Does it make more sense to try to bring those folks into a public water system and, where there's a more reliable supply?
Okay, thank you.
I have some comments in there. I have them on my sheet. First of all, the consolidation efforts on Hometown and Dune 3 are already being talked about by the Water District Board, and you should ask Don Sadiba to update you on those issues. And I'm not going to go further on that, except I don't think it's a GA issue. I think over the years many years we have lived here, we have met and talked to many people who live in large co-ops and mutuals. In every single one that we have talked to, the issues are the same. When the property was developed, and whoever developed it put in a water system, they applied to either Kern County or San Bernardino County. I don't know exactly what the standards and inspection was at that time, but it's obvious from talking to people today that the systems, not the wells, but the systems, the water conveyance systems that were put in the electricity and the storage were all substandard. The other major issue that exists is apparently many of these mutuals and large co-ops didn't create a proper legal document for the property owner to sign at the time. And not all, of course, but many of the property owners are not paying and have not been paying maintenance fees that are collected to have money to put in a new pump or well if needed, or replace leaky lines and so on. And the issue with many of the mutuals, I didn't say all, and co-ops, it's not a water supply issue because of water in a well. It's an issue of those individuals that are part of it not taking responsibility, that whoever created it didn't create the legal mechanism for the property owner to abide by, like you have in a public water system. And so, from the standpoint of the two that have been talked about, I think it should be handed over to Mr. Zadiba.
I have a
comments?
comment also. One is, I agree with Judy in that this seems to be more of a water district issue than a groundwater authority issue. My only question on that has to do with the grants. When you write grants, that sort of thing, it can be expensive. Is the groundwater authority going to be helping the water district get this supposed grant money from the state or federal government? Is that something the groundwater authority is looking into? And then the other comment I have is consolidation should be really looked at mainly for the water quality issues. Those are the ones that can't be solved by drilling a new well in the same area. So I would think that if the valley had problems with the groundwater quality, at that point, the groundwater authority would have to get more involved in partnering with the water district to look into these consolidation efforts, because no amount of money is going to help that person who's now getting brackish water.
I'd like to point out a little history. Back in the 70s, there was a development in San Bernardino County called the HLM. I don't know what else it was called. Those people in the early 80s came to the water district and asked to be incorporated into the water district because of a decline in water quality.
Would anyone mind if I have a comment or two here?
Absolutely.
Okay, I have a couple things to say.
I'd like to hear input from everybody.
Okay. First of all, I think at the highest level, what we're doing here is groundwater authority is tasked with precluding undesirable results. That's what SGMA says. And there are the seven deadly sins, and the two of them that really impact us in this basin are lowering of groundwater tables and groundwater quality. And so I see these remediation plans as kind of a firewall in a way that we're putting to preclude undesirable results. So from that perspective, I would think the responsibility falls to the groundwater authority to take the lead on whatever consolidation may be needed for an area where the groundwater quality fails. I think that belongs to the groundwater authority because that's their job, is to preclude undesirable results. And I have no problem with this being paid for by fees collected from the major pumpers, because we have to manage that pumping, and I think charging fees is a way of managing the excess pumping that would be causing these undesirable results.
Are you saying instead of the grant monies?
Well, I would say let's get grant monies every chance we can, but the ultimate responsibility, I think, if we can't get the grant money, then should be borne by fees that are paid by the pumpers. But certainly we get grants whenever we can.
Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Don, did you have comments?
The two consolidations that are currently in the works, the Hometown and Dune 3, the district did not write grants for those. Those co-ops or mutuals approached the state for assistance. And you're probably all aware that the state Water Resources Control Board is encouraging consolidations wherever it's practical and possible. Just from a regulatory standpoint, it's easier to regulate public water agency than these small mutuals. So consolidating with these co-ops and mutuals is something that they're trying to push forward. Both of these are totally paid for by this grant program.
So Don, for clarity, Did the state offer them the money to develop the grant also, the cost of the grant itself? Grants?
I'm trying to remember how this, some of these have been going on for 3 years. When they approach the state, the state does a at least for Dune 3, I think for Hometown as well, they look at income within that area, what the median income is if they qualify for the grant funding. And in these particular cases, they did. So I don't know, I don't think that I don't know that the individual mutuals wrote a grant proposal per se, but I think the state does the investigation to find out if they qualify, and then if they do qualify, then they initiate a study to find out what exactly they need in terms of, they contact the water district to see what's required to connect them to the system in terms of piping. Could their wells be incorporated in the water district system? In most cases, no. We wouldn't want their wells. Includes new service laterals. Do they need new service laterals? All these things. So they look at they could do an engineering design, what's required to make it part of the water district system, and we work with them on determining that, come up with a price, and then there's issues on easements sometimes. If we have to put in piping, are there existing easements, those sorts of things. So all these things, and it's been taking time. I said Dune 3, we've been having monthly calls every third Tuesday of the month since August of 2020. And that gives you an idea how long this process takes, and we're still not anywhere breaking ground. They need to do environmental reports, engineering design. So that's the process. Again, what has happened so far is that the mutuals or co-ops approach the state and say, hey, we're in trouble here. We'd like to consolidate with the water district, and that starts the process.
So your concern from the water district, well, actually from the water district and the groundwater authority's perspective, is how long it takes, since this would be a mitigation action of a pending failure, or perhaps the groundwater authority recognizing that there is the highest probability of shallow wells occurring in the valley is where the water table is lowering, and we have proximity to, in some cases like the Stark, the groundwater or the water districts pumping, the wells happen to be located close to there. So the expectations are that, and also in many spots in this valley, the preponderance of the shallow wells tend to be located around, somewhat close to some of the district's wells. Can we see this coming and recommend that we look preemptively at some of the shallow wells that might be within X distance, or whatever the criteria are that relate to cost, et cetera, of consolidation opportunities, and we get out ahead of it time-wise by going to take advantage of the state State Water Resources Board policy and requesting lead turn the engagement process with regards to grant requests and grant approval before they fail. So they are pending failure at some point. Is that something we can take advantage of to mitigate the cost of the timeline for what it would take? If you wait until they fail, now you have an urgency, and they almost could fall into that emergency requirement. But if we as a valley look at this as a whole and say, we know this is going to be a problem up until we reach sustainability, in 2040 timeframe, should we preemptively look forward and say it's far more cost effective, especially since currently there are grants? Let's do this now, where we see, looking at the hydrology that and the hydrographs, that these areas are going to be a problem most likely. I think that's what we're being asked to consider. Is we ask, if we ask for it to be a consideration, recognizing that the implementing authority in this case is the water district. We're not mandating it. It's just we're saying we recommend that you take a look at this.
I have a question. Actually, I have two. What happens if the mutual and co-op don't want to consolidate?
That's certainly a consideration. And
And that's one question. And one can see, at least I can see quite clearly and approve, I believe, of the water district enlarging to take over that area south of Inyo Kern as well as the area in between. But what about the co-ops, mutuals, or even the private well owners that live north of the overpass? How would they consolidate? They're a long ways from the water district. And part of the cost of joining the water district, and justifiably so, is to put in the infrastructure to do so. Now, Dune 3, I did email Don and ask him where hometown was because I wasn't clear. Well, it's right there by Buttermilk Acres store. It's right there by Well 17. It's not far from district lines. And neither is Dune 3, actually, because it runs mostly along Ward Street, west of, Calvert or something. But what about these areas that are farther out? The cost to join the water district is going to be high just in the never mind any wells, worrying about or neighborhood connections, but the connections of the pipe to join the water district's main system. And going to the north of Inyo Kern, to that area, and there are some large co-ops, mutuals out there that are actually in serious trouble, and I believe they are hauling and have been hauling water for years. They're a long ways from the water districts, the district itself, and they're a long ways from the district pipeline. How many miles is it from Victor and Inyo Kern Road out North Brown Road beyond the overpass, then to wherever the co-op is? I'm not going to get specific because I don't want to mention them in public.
well, if I were writing it, I would say wherever cost effective. And that would be something, because that should be consideration. And my suggestion was those that we know are closer and more available and have the possibility of going dry and needing the mitigation that all the ratepayers would have to fund versus getting this opportunity of almost total coverage of expended funds by the grants out in front of it. And we're not setting policy. We're not making an absolute you will, because we don't have the authority as a policy board, and the groundwater authority itself at this point doesn't have the ability to do that. They're saying as a member group, the water district is one of 5 on the JPA, and would it be prudent that the district look preemptively, given the possibility that we see of the cost of the shallow well mitigation program, which was a reasonable program in light of the not being able to stop the water lowering in the valley until X time when we get in balance? Should it be something that you go take a proactive look at? Where would it be cost effective, given this grant program and the possible recompense of fees, to do this to this area where it would be the most advantage to the valley? So if there is areas like those 2 that are existing, Dune, et cetera, and to say, hey, we can I'm not speaking very well tonight, preemptively mitigate these with little cost to ourselves, get grant money to do this, and avoid the probability when we look out into the future at these well areas where wells are located, the probability that they're going to become claimants against it later. And you wouldn't do that everywhere, obviously. You know, at some point, if I were in those areas and knew about the Sigma, I would be looking to say, well, maybe I want to investigate this and getting grants to do that water infrastructure out to my area. Obviously, we want to hit the low-hanging fruit. We, as a groundwater authority, want to hit the low-hanging fruit, all those that we think might very well be draining expenditures on us.
I think the first thing to do is to ask the water district their opinion of this and explore it with them, because it's not as simple as just putting in infrastructure. If you take away wells from mutuals, and their wells are small, and they wouldn't be appropriate for water district wells, just like when the water district took over or bought out the Stark system, their wells were not used. That is going to put additional burden on water district wells, because they will need additional supply to supply these people who were formerly on their own wells. And so I think this is a subject that needs to be looked at, not by the Policy Advisory Committee. It's something that needs to be taken to the Water District Board.
I would.
It will be their, I mean, you can get a grant to put in really nice pipes and laterals and, of course, meters. You didn't mention those. They will be necessary. And, of course, that will generate more funds for the GA, but it will create additional problems for the water district because they will need an additional water supply.
And those are all great considerations, and I would say that's something for the Groundwater Authority as a party within the Groundwater Authority to work with them to look at where is that trade-off spot? What are the trade-off spots? We're not going to make those decisions. We would be recommending simply that they look at, identifying those high overdraft areas and potential for higher number of wells, the most probable wells, and think about the cost, look at the cost trade-offs involved in those that are covered by the grants and those that aren't, as you cover, Judy. But that, from a policy, do that, take a look out proactively and say, hey, now that we've seen the cost of these mitigations, and it would be prudent for us to look forward and say, where are we most likely to have them in the future, and what would be where's the trade-off point? And I would do that in my own life. I look, well, if my well fails and I had 3 of them, I was a big farmer, I'd say, I better start looking at what the other ones are and what my mitigation options are, and then compare what my wallet can afford and can't.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense to me. And as you find wells failing, you would certainly look in the neighborhood. That might be a flag to check other wells before you mitigate a failed well. I have another comment, and then I'll cede to other folks. I hope we're not recommending that we only preclude some undesirable results unless they're expensive. I think the Groundwater Authority's job is to preclude undesirable results. That, once again, in my mind, are thresholds or firewalls that force the Groundwater Authority to stabilize the water in the valley. And so if we have large areas that are failing that need pipelines to get the water to them because the water is bad, that's a Groundwater Authority responsibility. The guys that are pumping should pay the fees to make that happen, because that is the essence of Sigma, is no undesirable results.
I just want to make a point of clarification, just because it seems like everybody here is under the impression that both Dune 3 and Hometown have applied for consolidation because of well problems. It's not the case. They've applied because of the people that are managing those systems are older, and the burden of managing those systems and all the regulatory requirements, that's what's driven them to apply.
No,
for
but they are an
consolidation.
example, and that was example of the policy implementation of the
I just
state's
want to make clear,
policy.
because it seemed like maybe there was a perception out there that the wells are going dry, and that's why they applied. That's
Yeah,
not the
and
case.
that isn't the case, but here's a policy example that our situation fits within, that we can take advantage of this to some degree.
To
And
back up what Don Zadiva said, and what I told you in the very beginning, and it's written in here. Most mutuals and co-ops don't have problems because their well has failed. They have problems because of, and I mentioned that they have come under the gun of the state because they serve many people, so they have to now, where they didn't in the beginning, follow many regulations. They're expensive. Their systems are not up to par. So they will have to have their whole pipeline system replaced. It's not their wells. And again, as Don said, the people that have been in charge, I know the one, he's been there forever. He's almost as old as we are. So he came over with Columbus.
that old.
That old. And that incidentally was the issue with Ridgecrest Heights. It was not that they did not have a water supply. It was that the infrastructure providing the water was terrible. How many quasi-public water systems do you know that used boiler pipe from Trona that had been sort of buried at one time, but when it was taken over by the water district, it was on the surface of the street on the dirt part of Ridgecrest Heights. And that's the way many of the mutuals are. They don't have boiler pipe for their water pipe, but they have substandard, too small, no money for maintenance, nobody who's willing to do the maintenance anymore, on and on with things like that, not water supply.
And those are things that would have to be taken individually into consideration for an individual area or a group that you want to consolidate.
Hey, Dave.
Let me add something here. In your current has a lot of these problems too. No real depth of staff, very small budget. Infrastructure is, on a shoestring. So, and we seem to not have been able to get the GA's attention as to how serious our situation is. I think the idea of a shallow well abatement program is a great idea, but it's a long way from having an idea to actually implementing it. It's a lot. There are many different kinds of wells. We have turbine wells, so and we can't even get them properly maintained or operational because of Kern County's helping us. So anyway, none of our problems are being solved, and I would suggest that probably all the mutuals and the co-ops have similar difficulties. So, I don't think the GA is recognizing the scale of the problem. And I've been trying to talk to the GA for a long time. Carol has promised discussions, haven't had them. Anyway, that's why I don't want to talk, because I get started and then, anyway.
Thank you. I know Tom was itching.
Sure. So for risk of showing how I'm not fully understanding the whole consolidation issue, but what I do understand is that better wells could be drilled using grant money for a number of people. And I understand their collectives. I'm not really sure how it's different than, basically making a bigger collective. But it seems to me that if there is an area that's the groundwater is lowering more quickly, it seems very proactive to look at this kind of thing. My thoughts are that because not everybody's house or well is going to be of the same age, there might be people who are really not that interested in getting on board because maybe they have a brand new well. I mean, the thing was just drilled, and it's maybe deeper than other people's. So you may actually end up with, sort of people not willing to join in. But I think, as a policy that if the GA could sponsor or urge people to do this consolidation in these high-risk areas, and maybe the GA could make some areas that they would support and help with the grant to do that the ratepayers wouldn't have to pay as much into the individual wells being mitigated, as a sort of a proactive measure here. And I think, that's the thing, why we're discussing this is how much should the ratepayers foot, for each individual well owner, what's fair? We're asking the question tonight, what's fair for a well owner to be expected to produce their maintenance records and things like that? Because, that's the issue is fairness, right? Who pays? Do all the ratepayers pay for the one who had old equipment and, and all that? But I like this idea of the consolidation because in my mind, if it is possible to get a deeper well for more people, to reduce or eliminate the undesirable effects, wow, why wouldn't we go that direction? I mean, I know when people like their independence, they like to be off the grid, so to speak, and that's good. If you don't want to join this new collective, then you don't. But maybe there's a way for you to buy in later if you decide that you want to, because you didn't get on the boat initially. That's kind of what I wanted to say was it seems like a great idea for the GA to encourage these high-risk areas to get on this board and be proactive.
The grant opportunity, just for clarification, as I understand it, for consolidation is the opportunity to qualify or consolidate with a known water purveyor, an entity like a water district. In this case, it's specifically the water district. So it's not consolidate something among themselves. It's tie into an existing regulated agency such as the water district in our case. So that's why there are considerations of costs and all the ancillary additional considerations for the existing infrastructure and what would need to be replaced there and the trade-offs. But there's still, to me, I agree 100% with you. Why wouldn't we look preemptively where we can find, we've already paid tax money that goes into these grants. Why would we not apply for that rather than use our fees for wherever we can do it? And it makes sense if you do it with the lead time because of how long you have to go through this process, we would not have to accept fees. And then perhaps in West, as Wes says, the responsibility for those areas that are further out, et cetera, for all the reasons that you said, is a different issue. But certainly you would mitigate as a prudent, reasonable individual. I certainly would try to preempt things that I knew were going to happen and could do it at no or lower cost.
Can I also say that the running of additional pipelines, I don't know how that cost factors compares with drilling a bunch of new wells, for individuals. But I do know that in North Dakota, there's whole areas that they have miles and miles of pipeline because you just can't get good groundwater. And so there are other areas in this country that run miles and miles and miles of pipeline to rural areas to do it. So it's not unprecedented to do it.
Trona is one of them.
I'd like to make a comment. I would like to point out to you all that when the shallow well mitigation plan was created, because we helped create it, it was to go into and it did go into the GSP. The GSP was written on the premise that all of the major pumpers would pay into the replenishment fee as well as the pumping fee. As of this time, the only major pumper that's paying into the replenishment fee is the Indian Wells Valley Water District.
So what do we want to do with this one? The proposal was that I think we have two ways to go. You know, I think I'm hearing that the majority of the board hears something positive in the idea of taking advantage of the state grants already provided by we, the taxpayers, to mitigate those that we suspect and are within the reasonable cost estimates will go dry prior to them getting into an emergency situation. And I think there are a number of questions that have been raised. If we said anything more, tried to be more specific about our recommendation than what I just stated, we would need a lot of additional information, technical information, in some cases, your impacts of your policy recommendation that we would be giving to the board, perhaps led by Stetson and with the Water District to advise us, or we have the opportunity to just make a general statement very simply that we recommend you look at this and consideration being given to this opportunity which is out there now. We don't have anybody to stand in front of us tonight and say what is the level of the grant. Does it cover, for example, where those issues that, let's take Stark, and Judy referred to Ridgecrest Heights. Those are one and the same. Stark was the water supplier in Ridgecrest Heights. I know because I had a house down there and I knew what lousy infrastructure it had. And so it would be required to do, you'd have to do its own, you'd have some fund requirements to do that infrastructure over or replace it or whatever. Is that part of the grant? We don't know those answers. So we could simply make a recommendation as simple as we recommend you look at this and where there might be some value in it as a board, because this is not part of the mitigation plan. It's saying the plan is a post happenstance.
Okay.
We're looking at preemptive.
David?
Okay, I have something. First of all, in order to go forward with this in any direction, it needs to be planned out. And I repeat, it needs to be discussed with the water district. The minute you go to the GA board and say, we want you to look at this, Stetson Engineers is going to step up and say, yes, I'll look into it for the GA board. How much is that going to cost the GA board for Stetson to look into it? That is a consideration. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Camille?
I like your idea of just having a statement that encourages them to look into this, because it appears, from my viewpoint, these types of projects fall in the GSP in the other projects section. Because we have that 5-year thing coming up where they're going to have to modify at 5 years, that might be something to consider adding into the 5-year plan when they look at all the projects, which ones have priority, which don't, that, oh, by the way, now we're looking in this area as opposed to this area as far as projects go. So I would suggest that it be rolled into discussions in the 5-year plan. But before that, maybe just the statement that we'd like for them to think about it or, look into that. But the recommendation would be to look into it more detailed for the 5-year plan.
Yeah, we don't make any decisions. We're simply recommending. We see from what we understand and know about this that there may be an opportunity that we as rational people think is worth investigating. And the GA, of which the Water District is a member, and we're not saying that Stetson would head it up right now or whatever. That simple recommendation could simply be that they explore this opportunity that we are now much more aware of because of the circumstances that surround the state water sponsorship of this grant level. And so it provides an opportunity to lead turn, again, I'm sorry, that's an aviation warfare term, to get in front of and be preemptive about mitigating the need for the mitigation fees and expenditures by the entire valley. And leave it at that. They can go, the Water District is certainly, it's a member of the GA itself, and they needs to be obviously collaborated with, and they are the implementer of it, so you can't do it without them. And that's for the staff. We're not going to dictate that. They work that out as what makes sense. And it may be that there isn't a pony in this pile, but it may be that there is.
Just one thing that's, I think, kind of come clear to me, there's really kind of two categories of consolidation that might be needed. If there were major areas that had significant problems with water quality, that would be a consolidation I think the GA would have to take the lead on. Or if there was an area that the bottom fell out of the well levels that needed to be consolidated, that might also be a GA responsibility. On the other hand, as Don's pointed out, and also from Inyokern, there are areas that people just aren't being able to afford to maintain the systems, and that's not a water quality or water level problem. That's more a funding problem, and so that's kind of a different category of consolidation. So we may have kind of identified two different categories for whatever that's worth.
And I think that's worth a lot. I know we got public comment that wants to get up here. Do we have any other board member comment before that?
Well, I did just want to say that exactly what Wes is talking about is if the GA, with Stetson, created these polygons that if you're within this zone and you have a well failure, we will really, you create the polygons that those are the areas where they're going to proactively work. But yet if you're outside the polygon, you do have a well failure, well, there is the shallow mitigation path that you could take. And in my closing comments, I'll talk about something that came to me as actually through public comment. I kind of even further defined what I think for shallow mitigation, what would be fair. So anyhow, thank you.
To follow up on what Wes said, the second category of not being able to afford the infrastructure or the regulatory compliance is a very big problem that the GA, I don't think, has recognized at all.
Am I up?
Thank you. No, yeah, we'll open it to public comment from the floor, please.
Ron Kosinski again. This might, I agree with you, just sending a general comment that it needs to be something that the GA, maybe the manager and the water manager needs to work on with the water district. However, this might help a bit. First of all, Judy's right. If you're going to do this, you need to ask for some, when they do it, let's define things. You have individual well owners, right? Diminished well owners. You have co-ops, which I understand to be 4 users of a single well, because they originated on the corner of 4 properties. And then you have mutuals, which is over 4. And the mutuals have to abide by all the state rules and regulations, all the reports and everything else that's going on. So number one is let's get those definitions straight. Secondly, you have two types of consolidations. You have a voluntary one, just exactly what Inyakern's talking about and what's happening with the water district now. So you might have a mutual that, or a co-op that says, I would like to connect to the water district, for what reason it may be. You might have an individual. When that happens, the paying for that is literally up to them. Just like what's happened to Water District now, where they had to apply with the state. Now, there may be grant money available probably for mutuals. And how much that will cover, I don't know. If they're miles away from a major pipeline for the water district, it may be much more. But you have the voluntary type, and I think you've all pointed that out. And that can occur for a lot of reasons. It can occur for mechanical reasons, maintenance reasons, regulations, management, whatever it may be. But they're voluntarily doing it. Isn't that they're having a water problem? They just say, you know what, we don't want to run this anymore. We want to connect to the water district. They in turn would do the same work that's taking place with Dune 3. And then you have the other type of consolidation, the one that is due to water quality and or lowering of water levels. That's the one where I feel that the GA would need to be involved. And at what level, I don't know, because there maybe there's state money available for those type of things that the GA can get that wouldn't be available for strict consolidation requests. And as Don said, the state is pushing for consolidations because there's so many regulations coming out, and I don't know, there's so many hitting the water district now that I know should be hitting the mutuals. A lot of reporting, a lot going on. So you might see that happen. So, and it all boils down to when you're talking about mitigation, water quality or lowering of water, I think, Dave, you said it, it's gonna be a cost-benefit analysis. If you have one well that you need to drill for, I don't know, what, $45,000? We'll get you a new well? I don't know. But if that's the case, if it's $45,000 to drill a new well for an individual de minimis user, but to get him to the water district might be, 2 miles of pipeline. And do the cost analysis. Exactly. But there are groups there are wells that are close to the water district. If something was to happen with their water, they can connect. And just as an example, I live in an area, and I don't know if it was considered the area that Judy was talking about. I'm on the other side of the highway from Ridgecrest Heights. And when I got in there, I noticed that on my property bill, there was an assessment. And the assessment was because the wells out there were having bad water quality. And the water district came in and put all new piping systems and everything out there as an assessment on our property tax for 20 years. And it was quite an assessment too. It was in the neighborhood of, it dropped each year, but I think it started at $3,000 a year. Per property owner, not per homeowner. Every property out there had to agree to it. So I'm just saying that if somebody wants that to voluntarily do a hookup, there's ways that they could do it, but it's very complicated, and look how long this works at the water district, 3 years already, and some of them, it could take years to make it happen. But when it comes to the GA, the ones you're concerned about is potential consolidation due to mitigation. And cost-benefit analysis is going to be the big thing on that one. As far as Inyakern, I think that type of thing, I'm not sure whether it's just approaching the water district and then looking, where do you get the grants, where do you get the money? But if the state is encouraging it, then there's some contacts and names you could probably get to say, what do I do to make this happen? And maybe there's money out there for it. And I believe, I think what you were talking about, Tom, was creating a new mutual. That if you have a mutual, if you have an area that needs 5 or 6 different individual wells, would the GA say, we'll help create a new mutual to serve those 5 or 6 people? I don't know the answer to that one, but it's one of those things that in your request for more information or for a study, that might be considered. Because if you have people that are so far away from hooking up to the water district, but they're fairly consolidated themselves, maybe one well can serve them all, and somehow the GA can get involved with that. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Ron. I did not mention that both the HLM system and the Ridgecrest Heights system, they had to pay assessment fees for their hookup to the water district. And the Ridgecrest Heights system, my understanding is the state insisted because there was so much problem with water delivery by Stark.
Thank you.
I had a comment I'd like to make. Particularly the consolidations that might occur due for sigma reasons, water quality or water levels, we have to kind of, from a 20,000 feet view, have to remember that that's going to be putting more and more pumping in the southwest. And so if you think of it as our basin as a bathtub we're slowly draining, we need to be careful. If we end up chasing for the water that's at the lowest part of our reservoir, if that's where we end up going without keeping our eye on it and planning it, that could be a danger. So that's the point I wanted to make, is that consolidation may tend to put more pumping in certain areas of the basin.
That's right.
Yeah, I think that's what the polygon plan sort of addresses. Don?
Don Decker again. Actually, the Thiessen polynomial really doesn't do quite what people think it does. It's just simply a way of integrating the basin so that you have a better overall understanding. There are other ways to do the same thing. I have a comment for you, and I don't have a solution. The TAC is down to one member. That's me.
I was going to say, who might that be?
With the lawsuit,
You no longer have a Navy member? I thought you had a new Navy member.
well, I don't want to say anything bad
Okay.
about people.
Okay.
There's a subcommittee that's been formed that is for the specific purpose of trying to provide direction and advice for the evolving groundwater model. And there are people who've been volunteered to serve on that basically don't know anything about modeling or groundwater modeling at all. So, but the TAC itself, with the lawsuits that have been filed, the water districts, Parker, for example, you just back away and be quiet. Your time will come with the discovery phase before the court. I probably myself shouldn't be still sticking with it, but if I were to pull out, Jean Moran, for example, would have no one to talk with and talk about what's happening and where to go. So I'm still with the TAC. They haven't asked me to leave. I'm very outspoken when I think it's appropriate, and I'll continue to do that for the near term here anyway. So when you talk about a TAC and a PAC combined committee, I'm not sure what that really means.
Thanks.
I'm still functioning as a TAC member, but we have no quorum, and we're
Perhaps one way to accomplish it is, I can ask if the remaining member of the TAC can be a part of that committee, because I think we have the ability when we form a subcommittee to have advisors, et cetera. And so I think that may be a way to address Judy's concern.
Yeah, I think it might be also fortunately, I still have a really good relationship with Stetson, and, we're talking back and forth all the time. So even when I chew their tail end off over crazy stuff that they've done, I still get a smile. So that's quite a possibility, that I would just be me.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks.
Do we have any online public comment? Noting none, what I'm going to suggest to move this forward productively is, in the PAC report, I'll summarize that we liked generally the concept of making a general a top-level statement, but we think there are some modifiers to that. And what we like to do, what I propose to do to address that is, I will capture that in a document that I think captures the main points that we generally agreed to, and I will, coincident with the PAC report going out, I will distribute that to this group. So at the next time we get together, we've got that document to discuss in relation to 2A, or I'm sorry, 5B. 2B was too much Shakespeare. So by doing so, we would have handled the first one, 5A, with the subcommittee, and we would have handled the second one with the simplified statement draft that I'm going to draft and present to the PAC for consideration at our next full get-together. We could perhaps do that electronically, but I think in the interest of public disclosure, we would rather have that distributed, everybody come have that and have their comments to it, and come at the next time we get together ready to meet that requirement and craft that, agree to a crafting of that statement that would be our recommendation for consideration. It's not going to have details, we've agreed on that, so, but it would have some considerations beyond just look at this. And that would be our way forward. Is that in general agreement by the committee? Okay, and with that respect, I am going to be out of town for most of the next, I'm sorry, Don? Go ahead.
I have a comment for the committee. Go ahead with what you're talking about. I'll finish right up at the tail end of your meeting.
Let's finish that, because mine is a slight change of pace.
What I wanted to say to you, Gene Moran finally got Navy Coastal royalty money for 2 wells. They're underway. If any of you on the committee would like to go up and visit, contact me and we will go up. It's the little neck of this basin that joins Little Lake.
From Indiakern, how long does that trip take around to be there and to see what you really need to see and get back? How long does that take?
Probably an hour minimum.
That's what I expected. Okay, thank you. So what I was going to say is, we darn near didn't have a quorum when we started today, and I am for one going to be gone probably 3 weeks of the productive days. I'm not available next month, and it is approaching the summer, and I've had some expressions of concern about next week's meeting, and we've got a lot of meeting these topics. I know the committees take several meetings to work out something like this, and we won't even get approval to do the committee as a combined format until the next GA meeting. What I'm proposing is either we adjust our May date, or we just punt to the regular standing date in June. And my recommendation would be punt to the standing date and give the committee especially a lot more time to flesh through all the great discussion that we had tonight up here in the dais and from our inputs.
When you say the committee, you mean?
Subcommittee.
Okay, providing the GA approves of it, right?
Well, we are forming the subcommittee. They gave us a task, and I'm reporting that we formed the subcommittee. The only thing I'm pending their approval is to have a PAC member be a part of it. And that will constant. Yeah, so thank you, Judy. PAC tag.
Yes.
I'm having a little bit of senior moments tonight with my diction, So, so that's the proposal, that we go forward with that. And so we do not meet in May, we would meet in June. And hopefully have a pretty well polished product from the subcommittee, and we would have had a chance to look at for an adequate number of time the brief statement that I'm going to draft. And so we'd have those two items on the agenda. If anything else comes up, that would be a third item. And by the way, if we get tasking, urgent tasking from the GA, should it happen on something else, we'll try to reschedule. I'll find a time when we can assure a quorum prior to that June meeting.
That's fine.
Good by everybody else?
Okay, I think so. I think I
After all,
understand.
there are no other senior citizens here except yourself, right?
No, there's nobody else here that's is as seasoned as I am.
Right.
Laugh. And there's a lot of real youngsters here, too.
Yeah, right.
We got a couple. Okay, so let's, member comments, let's start with you, Tim.
There's been a couple of suggestions that, In Your Current isn't paying their fair share. The water district has the money to pay. The fees that the GA is asking us exceed our total revenues. We can't pay more than we take in. So it's a bigger problem than that they don't seem to recognize. Anyway, closing comment.
Don?
Pass.
Renee?
No comment.
I'll pass. Good meeting.
Tom?
Sure. So the one thing that the first part of our discussion about 5A and the fairness on requiring maintenance records, I think we kind of beat that to death. But what we're getting at is I think the fairness for well owners who bring forth, their request to be helped out. And I was thinking about this. If maintenance records aren't really the best way for them to demonstrate their need, perhaps the GA could consider some sort of a formula that's based, primarily or the majority on groundwater lowering and quality, but also consider this residual value of the well as a factor, and also their documentation, that they have actually some skin in the game, so to speak, that they have attempted to take care of the well, that they haven't just ridden this thing to its bitter end, and now they're looking for other people to pay for their new well, and maybe maybe even an expectation that they wouldn't receive 100% of the well redrilling price. Maybe they can only get 90%. So to speak, so that they're guaranteed to have some skin in the game in all this. So, I was thinking like a 50%, groundwater lowering and quality factor, and then maybe 20% for the maintenance and documentation, and 20% for residual well value. And you would get percentage of points, to make it more objective. That's why I'm suggesting that these multi-factors.
Are you volunteering to be also on the subcommittee?
I'm probably not really that qualified for it.
I was kidding.
But I had a big idea. So anyhow, I wanted to share it before we left.
And I wanted to offer that, okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks. Camille?
I have no comment.
Lyle?
I'm not sure if I have a comment or not. I want to make sure I understand on our committee here. We're taking on, you're going to write for the May GA, you'll write something on B, right?
Yeah, that's not
It's
your
just
committee.
just a top level, right?
Correct.
Okay, and the committee is going to take on A.
Correct.
And but we're not going to meet again as a PAC until June.
Correct. For a regular meeting.
For a regular.
We may have a special meeting if an urgent need arrives.
Yeah, right, I understand that one, so. Okay, I think.
Okay, and I neglected to to ask Carol if she had any additional input or comment on these topics before, and I'll do that before my closing comment. Carol, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, I don't think so. Dave, thank you. I think you folks have done a lot of discussion this evening, given a lot of consideration to how to deal with some of these things. I'm looking forward to what the subcommittee comes back with. I think that'll be good information. It's good hearing from some of the private well owners, as opposed, we have experience working with the municipal systems. It's good to hear from the private well owners, I think, as to what the expectations might be. So appreciate your work on this.
Thank you, Carol. And I think it would be appropriate for us we saved this item, member comments, that we include you first, perhaps, because you're part of the implementation and considerations representing the GA staff as a whole and the GA. And I think it'd be good to hear from you before we close the meeting and then make our individual comments.
I got one further thing too. I agree with Tom. It seems like the age of the well ought to be some factor in this, I believe.
You're on the subcommittee.
Yeah, I know. And I'm cutting my own, stabbing my, whatever,
Yeah.
However, but it seems like I think it should be a factor.
Well, it certainly is, but how is there
Don't know.
consideration for that an owner should be able to provide something related to that?
Yeah, I don't know.
That's
No,
the issue.
that's yet, we'll have to think about that.
I mean, there's a lot, we knew there was a lot to this one, because it isn't just the maintenance records. There's a lot of considerations, and it does come down to, was the damage, the lack of function caused by the water quality or changes or
the level and water quality is the two factors.
Yep.
And,
Was it lowering levels or due to the valley lowering? So my closing comments are, this has been a very interesting and good meeting, I think. This is the kind of policy level things, considerations. It is subjective. Policy is very much subjective, and I think that's everybody's been engaged. We've moved forward on that. I think we have a good path with, we have laying the seeds for a great discussion in the subcommittee. The second closing comment I would have on a negative, not everybody has turned in their Form 700s, which includes me, and we're due. They're due now.
I have a comment. You didn't ask me for my closing comments.
Did I skip over you? My apologies, Judy. It wasn't intentional.
I know. It was another senior moment.
Yeah, I've had too many tonight.
Well, gosh. We'll have to sign you up for ARP.
Not
I
ARP.
actually don't have any closing comments. I think it was an interesting discussion, and I think it brought up a lot of things that need to be looked at on
Good.
both subjects.
Agreed. Thank you. All right, with that, I'll return us to our own time and the public to its own time. Closed.